Hi there, I'm your host Marlene McConnell and welcome to the Surviving Trauma Stories of Hope podcast. In this week's episode, I am delighted to welcome the self-relationship coach, Christina Carlson, to the podcast. Christina is a coach, a speaker, a facilitator, and the host of the podcast Bitches, Witches, and Queers. So when you have a chance, please check that out. Christina was raised in a radical religious group and joined 2 cults as an adult before reconnecting to her body through dance, discovering her own sexuality, deconverting from religion, and discovering spirituality. In our conversation, we explore topics around radical religious groups, cults, self-love, spirituality, the journey back to self, and so much more. Christina is certified as an energy coach and a life coach and helps women and non-binary folk to heal and grow their relationships with themselves. It has been my pleasure to have Christina join me, and I know you will enjoy this episode. Thank you to my listeners for joining me on this journey. Comment on the posts on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn and let me know what you think. Also head to Amazon.com or takealot.com to get your copy of my book, Ray of Light, and please leave me a rating and review. It means the world to me. Also, please check out my website and download your free journal prompt and relaxing meditation on the resources page. As always, stay tuned and keep listening. Hello, Christina. Welcome to the Surviving Trauma Stories of Hope podcast. How are you doing?
Wonderful. Thank you.
You look absolutely beautiful. I know the listeners can't see you, but I absolutely adore the colorful jacket that you are wearing. It's such a bright, lively visual. So I wish they could see that. You look beautiful.
Thank you. It's it's part of my story, like everything is. I now wear a lot of color.
And I think for a lot of people, that's such a challenge. I mean, I have friends that, they would stick to black or cream, beige. That's it.
I wore black for the first 29 years of my life.
Okay.
So
it's safe to say it was not a phase.
Yeah, I'm a lot more colorful now.
Good. I love it. It's wonderful to have you here, and I want to thank you ahead of time for just sharing your story with us. This is the first time that I have a guest on the podcast that was raised in a radical religious group and also the environment of cults. So if you had to think back to your childhood, tell me about what that was like.
Yeah, I love talking about my life story and any story, but especially mine, because you can see a story from a million different perspectives, right? Like every time you tell a story, it's like, oh, I could tell this from the version of all of the fear and anxiety and pain that I went through. And I could also tell this from the weird, quirky, curious place, or the happy stuff that happened, So I'm kind of
yeah,
the beauty. Because life is all of it.
The beauty of storytelling.
Yeah, life is all of it. And I mean, as a kid, which I'm sure you've heard this from a lot of people who have been interviewed by you, a lot of kids just accept things for what they are. We don't know any different, so we assume that what we experience is normal. So I grew up homeschooled until high school. So the first, 12, 13 years of my life, 14 years actually, I went to high school halfway through at a small Christian school. But up until that point, I was homeschooled. Okay. And I had homeschool communities of small, also deeply religious groups of people that we would spend time with. Our social interactions were limited to the people that were similar in belief to us. The closest version I had to a very, what we called very liberal or not non-believers or people on the outside were people who were Catholic, which makes me laugh now because Catholics are so similar in so many ways. But we considered them
yeah. But if we talk, Christina, about the religious group, we're talking about a religious group that was very staunch Christian, or what was the religion?
So I grew up evangelical Christian. And that was in several different denominations,
Okay.
but it was the Midwest. So if you're familiar with the United States, there's an area called the Bible Belt, which is like the Midwest and the South. And that's kind of the area that I grew up in. My family homeschooled us because the education wasn't that great around the area, but also to give us an education that was directly in line with the beliefs that we were taught. So we were taught creationism, not evolution. We were taught Bible as a class and as like a daily ritual. And the way that this impacted me is like multiple folds, right? Like we had this space of getting to be homeschooled and do things outside of school, which in a lot of ways allowed for rest and like creativity in ways that I wouldn't have had if I went to school. But the thing was like the whole system is based on shame and a belief that I was evil from birth. Like we're just born bad and born like with nothing good inside of us. And we were told that very often. So there's this overarching feeling of nothing good comes from me. I'm a bad person. I need to be kept in line. I need to be like controlled in a way, or else I'm not safe. So I was told that like I could sin with my thoughts. Like if I had a rogue thought that I could end up in hell if I thought something poorly. I was told that like I could do that without knowing it. And that would also be deadly. So there was a lot of anxiety. And then there was anxiety about having anxiety because that was considered distrust in God. So it was like really intense.
Yeah, but also, I mean, it's such a horrible belief system to impose on a child because our beliefs. It's really our thoughts and our ideas that we accept as our truth, like you pointed out earlier. That when we are children, we don't know any better, and so we accept that as our gospel, as our truth, which is what you are experienced.
Yeah, it is really unfair to put that on a child because of the way that your mind is forming. And my mind like basically fractured when I was 11. I was reading through every verse in the Bible like multiple times a day that had anything to do with being saved and not going to hell. So I was like obsessing over trying to figure this out, trying to figure out how I could know for sure. And there actually wasn't a way. And like eventually like a pastor was like, yeah, that's true. You can't like, because it's like this and this and it's like whatever. So there wasn't actually a solid answer given to me and my brain just couldn't compute with it. And I like had to cut off part of myself that was curious and that needed to know. And it just like kind of broke in order for me to stay there.
And it's such a tender age, Christina, 11.
Yeah, it's so little.
Yeah. And so if we skip ahead to adulthood, if I think about the cults that you eventually would join, would you say that was sort of a direct result of the way that you were raised and your belief systems, that it was just a natural progression to sort of seek that out, but perhaps in a different form?
Yeah, I was actually going to use those exact words, that it's a natural progression, because the stories that I was told as a child were very, now looking back, I'm like, it's white savior centric. Like it's white people going out to save the world and share the gospel. It's like die for the cause at the cost of yourself. Like to die was the ultimate goal, not goal per se, but like it was the ultimate glory was to die for this cause. And those stories were our bedtime stories.
Yes.
So of course that's extreme, right? That's extreme. So in being in a space that started to take things more extreme, it made sense that I would gravitate towards that because I wanted to be like my heroes.
So can you describe for us what kind of a cult you joined and what life was like inside a cult?
Yeah. So I joined a Christian cult. It was a version of Calvary Chapel, and it wasn't a cult when I started to join it. It became a cult as I was there. So like a lot of these communities, that end up with cult-like behavior are like, there's this like level when you're on the outside, it doesn't behave like a cult. If you're just visiting, you're not like all the way in. But as I got up in leadership within this community, the more and more this dysfunction just spread outside of it. So what happened when I was there was I began to, I was on leadership staff at a college, a small Bible college, and I was having conversations with the students about things that the pastor was saying and, you know, encouraging dialogue and discussion. And the pastor found out about it and said, you can't be having these conversations and putting doubt in people's minds. If you have a question, you need to come directly to me. And I was like, that seems problematic. Like, but, you know, like it was just like kind of grating against my own rebelliousness. But still, it's like we were taught to respect and taught to believe people, and like pastors have a certain level of authority and aura around them, you know, because they were the heroes. So they started to, and I guess this was happening a little bit before, I just didn't know about it, but they started doing like, they wouldn't have called it this, but if you're familiar with the Amish tradition and Jehovah's Witnesses, it's like a shunning. Essentially, they kick people out and don't speak with them. Yes. And they ask their community members not to speak with them, even if they see them, unless it's to ask them to like go through a set of stuff to come back to the community. So there's this like really harsh like punishment for disagreeing. And we had people brought up in front of the church and humiliated and shamed for like quote unquote sins, like having sex like 12 years earlier with a girlfriend and like all kinds of things that was just like, it made it into a public drama and public shame for the people who were involved. And it was really uncomfortable to see and scary, because what happened was anytime, because I was on the leadership of this Bible college, anytime I was in a meeting, this person made everything seem okay. And you'd find yourself like agreeing and smiling and being like, yeah, of course, that makes sense. And then you'd walk out of there an hour later and you're like, what just happened?
Perfect. Yeah.
It was very odd. And ultimately it was the reason that I ended up leaving. I kind of found a way out through, because my boyfriend had left due to a health issue. And so they excused that and kind of sent him on his way. But it was really overwhelming and intimidating and felt really unsafe to be curious, unsafe to ask questions. We didn't have any space for that.
Yes, and I suppose, you know, the rules were very clear within this cult. And like you say, there's absolutely no room for doubt. So everybody pretty much towed the line. I would imagine that cult leaders, in this case, the pastors of this cult, wouldn't necessarily allow people to leave freely. But did you experience that?
No, I think they wanted people to leave who weren't like fully in. It's a different way of approaching things. But it was like, basically like, if you don't fully agree with us, like get the fuck out. Like it was really.
Yes, then you can't sit with us.
Yeah.
And
yeah, because he wanted,
and like we shun you, and you might want to come back, but then you will toe the line.
Yeah, because you aren't really safe there. It's really like the thing about humans is that like we don't want to call ourselves what we are most of the time, right? Like this place wouldn't have called itself a cult. It wouldn't have called any of these behaviors problematic. It wouldn't identify as this. But so much of it I was really blind to because of that, because it wasn't so overt at first. It wasn't so like dramatic on the front end. Like you had to be in it for a while and moving up in leadership and involved in these things to start to hear this stuff. And it was just like, it felt like a natural progression of the Bible and Christianity. And I started to dissect Christianity because of that. Because according to like what they were saying, it actually did make sense. Like they were following the Bible and they were publicly shaming people, and it was a cult. And it was like, how is this possible if you are saying you are, you know? And it was just like, kind of one of those things where I was like, oh, these things can very easily coincide with one another.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem.
The one can almost morph within the other. It might not be the intention that you set out,
Right.
either for a leader or a follower, but
Mm-hmm.
the one could morph into the other.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't even know. Like you were saying, you're going to the meeting, you're sitting, you find yourself agreeing, and you think afterwards, what did I just agree to? And why did I look so happy?
Exactly. Like, why was I doing this? And like looking back, I'm like, oh, that was probably fun. It was probably a trauma response to like cope with being in an environment with someone who's manipulative.
Yes. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because I do feel like, the instigating events in our life, it's different for all of us. And, an event like this could be experienced as traumatic. And, it could have long lasting impacts on the members.
Mm. Yeah, especially for the people who were like publicly shamed and taken out of these spaces. There's one moment
Yeah.
that I like will never forget. And we were like, as a core group of leadership, we were like discussing like what should happen for punishment for these people who had been publicly shamed. We were required to be at this meeting. This meeting was in a tent because it was Hawaii. So we were outside. There is water, like 3 inches of water rushing underneath our feet. And they brought food, they brought pizza. They knew that I couldn't eat it. And they were like, here, have a salad. So I had a salad. We were in there for 3 hours. And at one point I stood up to go to the bathroom, and one of the leaders was like, sit down. You can't leave because we need to finish discussing this all together. And I like pushed my way past him to get out and go pee. But it was so intimidating. I was like, this grown man who's taller than me just stood in my way and was like, no, sit down. Like, what is happening?
Unbelievable. I mean, unbelievable.
Yeah.
What an experience, I must say. I mean, I'm always shocked and amazed at the human behavior and what we think we can get away with. And some of the covers that we use and impose to mask our behaviors, essentially.
Yeah.
So you eventually left this cult and you found a way to deconvert yourself from religion, but have this beautiful experience of discovering spirituality. That for me is such a beautiful experience. The two for me go hand in hand. So I have a strong spiritual interest and I have a very strong religious interest and background. But I'm curious to know, when you come from such a radical belief system, how do you make that change? And what was that like for you, experiencing spirituality as the complete opposite as religion?
Yeah. It takes a lot more intention and attention than just leaving something, right? Like, if we want to talk about human behavior, like the instinct of leaving an abusive situation is that you usually end up in another abusive situation that just looks different physically. So in order to like the way that I was indoctrinated was in extremes, right? Like
There's the word, indoctrinated.
Yes.
And that's what it was.
Yeah, it was, everything was like in or out. Everything was black and white. Everything was like right or wrong in a very extreme sense. So when I left religion, because I like came out as queer and was like, this doesn't fit, my tendency and what I did was go to the extreme other side and was like, well, now I'm just going to identify as like radical, liberal, which, in the US means something different. Essentially, it means like equality, and like there's this whole political movement. And instead of actually being with and dissecting those pieces and uncovering what was for me, I just kind of latched onto another thing. Like, I'm all science now and I only believe what I can see. And like, I had to, because I needed to find something other than what I was in. But I was having a conversation with a friend several years ago, and I was like, yeah, I just don't want to believe anything that's not true. And they were like, that sounds really religious. And I was like, oh shit. It's the same concept. It's the same concept that was coming out in me. And I was like, oh, that's not freedom. if I'm just saying, like, if I'm just putting myself in this box again? So I started to explore with spirituality, and I started training to be a life coach. And then I went to devoted energy coaching school with Sora Schilling and studied energy work. And it's deeply spiritual practice and deeply different than what I grew up with, and truly, truly beautiful. And for me, it was just like, oh, this element of being alive, this spiritual element, is something that actually has always meant a lot to me. It's just, that wasn't it. Like, what I grew up with was not it, because that wasn't freedom. That wasn't being human. That wasn't sacred practice and loving everyone or allowing all people to be human. And so it's taken a lot more attention and intention than just like leaving. But I'm so happy for this journey.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, I can see that, and I mean, or for me at least, the making that transition and really embracing the spiritual journey comes with so much self-love. It comes with so much positive belief systems, right? And really leaving the negative and belief systems that you were indoctrinated with behind. How did you discover self-love work?
That's such a good question. I think actually one of the first beliefs that kind of anchored me through the process of leaving religion was the idea that I could be good and that I was good. Came to me in a yoga class, and our instructor was talking, and he said, "Say I am good," and I just started crying. And I was like, I haven't been allowed to believe or think or even consider the fact that there's a part of me that is good. So from there, it became a journey of like actually offering myself love. But it took longer than that. Like I work with people a lot in my coaching work around getting to self-love or moving towards self-love. And I really think self-neutrality and like self-acceptance are part of that. Like, we don't just go from like living a life where we think we're trash to like, I love myself now. And that's fine. Like, there's such a beauty in neutrality, because you are also seeing the parts of you that have caused harm to others. You're able to hold that. And through the process of all of that, have always been seeking. And now I feel like I found in many ways a spirituality that allows me to exist in every part and doesn't deny difficult feelings, doesn't deny reality, and also elevates it.
Yeah. But what would you say were some of the challenges that you face? I mean, this is very empowering, the kinds of things that you're talking about, making this transition. And it's not an easy journey, definitely not linear. And it does take time. So what would you say were some of the challenges that you faced when you were truly taking back your power?
Yeah, I feel like this is an ongoing process for sure. I think one of the biggest challenges has been working and dealing with internalized shame, because shame is so deeply ingrained in a lot of how we were disciplined as children. But especially within that religious structure, there was a lot of intentional shaming of children and of people in general. So as I tried to move into self-love, I kept uncovering more shame and finding that at the root of it, I believed I needed to feel shame in order to become a better person, and that I needed to feel shame in order to feel safe, because I had been in this cycle for so long. I was so familiar with feeling shame that even though it felt awful, it was like a problem my ego knew how to solve. Like, there was, it was like, oh, I get this though. I'm supposed to feel like shit. And then I try again, and then I fail, and I feel like, it's like, I know this cycle. So that to me, through, I don't know if you're familiar with Kristen Neff's work. She wrote a book called Self-Compassion. And that book really radically supported me in this journey in a way that I teach it to my clients now, because it's so profound. It allows you to be with yourself in feelings without adding those stories. and supports moving through shame in a way that can allow you to actually create change. And I would say that's been the most challenging thing to be with and also the most beneficial.
Mm-hmm. But also, if you are accustomed to shame, those are the emotions that and those are the emotions that makes you feel safe. And so it's kind of, after being indoctrinated like that, it's sort of natural almost to gravitate to that feeling, because the big question is, who are you if you do not feel the shame? Who is Christina?
And that's like the big terrifying thing that keeps people in there, is like, if I shift this thing, if I leave the shame or if I leave the system or whatever it is, I have to start over. Like, I have to, and thankfully my brain allowed me to go at a slower pace that allowed me to like take one of these things apart at a time. But it's a lot of like, but wait, then what do I actually think about that? And what does that mean for me as a human? Like, what do I do? What do I believe? It's so much easier to just jump to a whole other set of like, now I'm a yogi and a vegan and I, like just adopt a whole thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, Christina, you have not written any books at all.
Not yet. I'm
When
working
can
on
we
one.
expect? When can we expect your book?
Probably next year.
Good. I like that answer, because you have so much wisdom that I feel you can share, in a book. And I mean, it would have so much value, contribute so much to people, and can truly change lives.
Thank you.
So I wanted just to ask you now, you mentioned as we were talking that you are a energy coach, a life coach. Do you want to talk about, for the listeners that want to work with you, perhaps just share with us, what kind of work you do and what some of the services are that you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. My work, I call myself a self-relationship coach because in my own journey, that has been the growing relationship. The seat of all of my growth and development has been how I have related to myself. And that's the frame that I've seen it in. And so I work with my clients to really connect with themselves in a personal way. I think through, it's my opinion that in our global history, white supremacy has colonized a lot of the globe. And in doing so, we have brought in this power dynamic where there's an oppressor and the oppressed. And it's this very imbalanced way of dominating things, dominating people, dominating cultures. So there is actually this whole way of existing that has infiltrated everything that we do. We treat our bodies very similarly because this is the pattern that we were taught. We're taught to dominate our bodies to get things done for the sake of productivity. We are taught to dominate our feelings for the sake of getting things done, for the sake of productivity. There's a lot of this domination that happens within ourselves. We dominate our feelings, we dominate our thoughts, we control ourselves instead of being in relationship to ourselves. So what happens when we've like taken on these roles that we've been told to be in, told to follow, is we lose that who am I part because we are not in relationship with ourselves. So the work I do with my clients is supporting them to begin to be in relationship with themselves instead of relationship over or dominating our bodies and ourselves. And in doing so, creating a pattern that creates a ripple effect in their lives, in business, in relationships, and with themselves. Because I really think, I say self-relationship, but I do believe that individually and collectively, healing needs to happen in both of those ways in order for it to actually be impactful. I just know from my own work that it often starts with being able to deal with that shame internally and being able to be with what is in our own bodies and our own experience, those feelings, thoughts, and desires that we have repressed. So that being said, most of my work is one-on-one with clients and supporting people who are fucking sick of patriarchy or a religious system that has been harmful to them, supporting them to find what feels more empowering to them.
That's awesome. I mean, wow. And I love the way that you've described that relationship with the self. It's a different perspective from, the way that I've always engaged with that concept. So thank you for
Mm.
that. If anybody wants to follow along, Christina, where can they find you?
Yeah, probably the best way is ChristinaMCarlson.com. That's my website where I have all the information about working with me. And the other best place is Instagram, which is at Christina Carlson Life Coach.
Perfect. Okay. Do you have any last words of inspiration for the audience that you would want to share with them?
Yeah, I'll just say you're doing enough and you're doing your absolute best today.
Yeah.
And you can believe that.
That is the best assurance that you could give anybody, Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Christina, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining me. It was wonderful speaking to you. And I'm so happy that you overcame and, you're able to make that journey back to the self, and that now you're really in this power position to really help others and shed the light on some of these very difficult topics, like radical religious groups and cults, and how to help others to navigate through those. So thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you, Marlene. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
That wraps up this podcast episode. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy my podcast, please take a minute to give me a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast directory so you don't miss an episode. Please consider following My Centered Life on Facebook and Instagram for daily inspiration. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. You can catch me again in the next episode. Same time, same place. Sending you lots of love and light. Bye.